Hi VC, yeah, I'm back again with another video. This was originally meant to be a response to the Vinyl Professor's video that he did about abrupt left turn albums. Um, and it's all, but it became more than that. When I was listening to the records involved, I've just immersed myself in these records. Just absolutely immersed myself for the last 4 or 5 days. I've listened to nothing but basically, and just been blown away by these records again. So it's kind of also a chance to redress the balance of love on this channel following my last deconstruction of Tonight. So in that vein, I'm gonna talk about this album, Young Americans by David Bowie. Let's put it that way so you can see the picture better. There we go. Now this, at the time it came out, seemed such a left swerve from Bowie. Probably his first major left turn in his career. All the preceding albums that he'd recorded could be seen as kind of a progression, even through, he went from the folky stuff, then he slowly got heavier, through Man Who Sold the World, then he became Ziggy, and he got the glam years. And then this came out. But I'm going to argue that maybe he did telegraph it a bit, and it wasn't such an abrupt change as it might first have seemed. Anyway, so the story of this album really begins on the preceding album, Diamond Dogs, which, as I've said before, probably loads and loads of times, is my favourite Bowie album. So this is it's a game of two halves. This album, it's all dystopian, bleak vision of the future, but half of it is definitely glam. But then I think the second half of this album is more of it's Bowie spreading his wings stylistically a bit. There's definitely forebodings, for pre-warnings, whatever you want to say, of Young Americans on here, and they all come really as part of the songs he recorded for an aborted musical based on 1984. He contacted the Orwell estate whether he could produce a musical based on 1984, and they bluntly said no. But he'd already written some of the songs, so they all found a place on this album. So side 2 kicks off with Rock and Roll With Me, which is just a glorious ballad. But it's obvious from it that he'd been listening to something else. There was something else going on in the mix. Yeah, it's a glam ballad, but I think he's trying to sing in a completely different way on this. But he hasn't found his, I don't know, soul croon? Guess that's the best way of explaining it. And then it continues on into We Are the Dead, which is really doomy and keyboard led. It's just a complete change of style. It's like glam is over. The first side dealt with glam, that's it. And he's doing something else on this side. It's a slow, and it's almost R&B. It's almost an R&B ballad. Then this moves into the funkiness of 1984, using R&B rhythms, and there's definitely disco strings on there. He's obviously listening to Philly Soul then. I mean, it was the start of his Plastic Soul phase, I think. And then you've got Big Brother, which has got processed trumpet all the way through it. And there's definitely more soulful vocals on it as well. And then you've got the chant of the ever-circling skeletal family, which is, quite frankly, when I first heard that, I was terrified. I think I must have been 8 or something, 7 or 8, and it was just so far removed from anything else I was listening to at the time, top 40 chart fodder. It's just unbelievable. And all I can say about that side of music is it definitely wasn't glam. It's just something completely different. So then, Bowie decided he was going to take on a really intricate, massive stage show to America based on sort of the Diamond Dogs and Halloween Jack and all the rest of it, and all the nightmare imagery on the album. And it started off in June 1974. As the Diamond Dogs tour. And then part of the way through that tour, he released this, which is David Live. Now, you couldn't get much more different, this image of Bowie, than the one that was on Diamond Dogs. I mean, if you compare the two, he's still in sort of Ziggy mode here, really. Alright, the character's name was Halloween Jack, but it was still basically playing the same sort of character. The Ziggy hair was still there. It was a Bowie that people knew and loved. Whereas here, you got the soul crooner. In a sharp suit, Ziggy hair's gone, slick back. Completely different image. Completely. It must have been a real shock to see this cover in 1974 when this came out. And the sound of the record is different. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of stuff off Diamond Dogs, obviously. There's stuff off Aladdin Sane and Ziggy Stardust. But the way that he was singing it was completely different. There's added horns, and it's just overall become more funky. I mean, there's some versions of some of the songs are just so different. You've got the Latin version of Aladdin Sane, where he's experimenting. You've got, what else is on here? You've got Moon Age Daydream and Sweet Thing. They've all got really soulful vocals on it. I mean, part of the criticism that was levelled against this live album is that his vocals sound strained, which probably was something to do with the vast amounts of cocaine that he was taking. He'd lost so much weight on here, it was unbelievable, and he was thin anyway. But I don't think he'd actually found his voice yet. He wasn't there with his voice, and he couldn't do what he wanted to do justice at this point. And then probably the biggest pointer on this album of his forthcoming direction was Knock on Wood, which is a cover of an Eddie Floyd track. And it's so different. I mean, coming in 74 like a bolt out of the blue. I mean, it hit the UK top 10, but it was completely different. I mean, I laughed when I read that Mick Jagger said if he'd recorded something as bad as Knock on Wood, then he would have just stopped recording. Well, Mick, you didn't stop recording when you recorded those lousy 80s albums, did you? Anyway. And then Gene Genie is the verses are just stripped down to his vocals with a beat, and he's crooning them, absolutely crooning the verses on there before the band kicks in with the chorus. So I see this as part of the story that Young Americans wasn't completely unheralded. So, Young Americans itself started to take shape on a break from the Diamond Dogs tour, when he visited Philadelphia, which is where David Live was recorded. and he stopped off at Sigma Sound Studios, which is where Philly label recorded most of their stuff. I mean, it's obvious he was absolutely in love with that kind of music at the time. And there, the great lost album, The Gouster, took shape. Now, I don't have a copy of that box set where you can get it, but I have listened to it. I've streamed it. And it's a soul record, out and out soul record. But it's quite a downbeat record, quite a downbeat album. Sorry, I'll keep referring to my notes because I've taken reams of notes here. It's not joyous at all, which is something I don't think you can level at Young Americans itself. Even Young Americans, placed where it was, which is the song before the end of the album, doesn't really lift things very much. You got versions of Right and Who Can It Be Now, and they're just so downbeat. The whole album is down. It sounds like he's doubting himself. It sounds like he's not comfortable in his own skin. It's just not good. Now, as part of the sessions, he basically reconfigured the band. So he brought in David Sanborn on sax, brought in Carlos Alomar on guitar, and he brought in a group of backing vocalists, but especially Ava Cherry, who I think was already singing with him, Robin Clark, and Luther Vandross. And they completely changed things, I think, as they worked on the material they recorded in Philly, and then later on, after the tour went on as the Philly Dogs tour, the material evolved, and then it really became Young Americans. So in the autumn '74, they resumed the tour. El Slick was still playing guitar. He was the main guitarist on here. But Carlos Alomar was brought in to play rhythm guitar, and I think he's one of the main changes that really sparked Sessions Alive. So there was further recording done in November, December, but before that, and now you can get it legally, he recorded the Cracked Actor special, but they recorded a gig at in LA in September, and there the sound of the gig is just so different. I've had this for a while. This is a bootleg that I downloaded off the internet, and it's called Strange Fascination, but it is actually the Cracked Actor concert, and you can hear the difference already, just on things like his vocals sound looser, they sound more in control, his versions of Time is brilliant. Things like he's now including It's Gonna Be Me on the track listing, and the disco version of John I'm Only Dancing, which made the Gouster but was dropped and then released as a single much later in '79. So you can tell the difference that having the backing vocalists and Carlos Alomar on board and David Sanborn on board and all of that is making to his music. So then, after further sessions in November, December and January in New York, where he actually got John Lennon in on, as everybody knows, he got John Lennon in on the sessions, who dropped by and they recorded some stuff together. He finally came up with this. Now this, I think, by certain Bowie fans, it is really disliked. I know people who are so into Bowie, and they think this is just an awful album. Coming after his run of glam albums and before Station to Station, they just really underrate it, and I think it's a superb album. What's different about this album is it's a vocalist album. A lot of the albums before had really been guitar, like whether it was Mick Ronson or well, for a long time it was Mick Ronson, but it wasn't. I mean, obviously Bowie was front and centre, but this is such a vocalist's album. I mean, on here, Bowie sounds exactly like he needed to sound. Sounds completely chilled and controlled, but then when you consider the amount of stuff he was putting up his nose and just the shambles that his personal life was in, it's just absolutely unbelievable the amount of control he managed in his vocals and the amount of control he managed on this record, because apparently the sessions for this album were chaotic, to say the least. So let's go on to the reason for this video, which is this album, Young Americans. And I'll just run through the tracks. This might take a while as well. So it opens up with Young Americans itself, which is actually quite a bleak lyric to what is a pretty upbeat song. It's about a couple who are just, they're sick of each other, really, and it's kind of reminiscent, kind of represents the feeling behind the Gouster more lyrically than a lot of the rest of the record. So then that moves into, I mean, it's a brilliant song, absolutely brilliant song, and it was one of the first songs that I really liked. It just hit me. I think the first time I heard it was on the Changes Bowie compilation, and it really just ate its way into my brain. That and another track, Fame, that's on here as well. They just both ate into my psyche, and I just loved them both. So then you move on to Somebody Up There Likes Me. No, you don't. Not at all. It's not right. A load of rubbish. So after Young Americans, you get Win. So it wafts in on fluttering sax, and it has the most brilliant twisting chorus. It's kind of like I don't know, it's hard to describe. It's kind of like a sinuous chorus. I mean, Win is a glorious upbeat ballad. Bowie's singing is fantastic. And then when you get to the languid coda, with Bowie riffing on the main line of the song, mixing it up with the backing singers, it just sounds absolutely glorious. Then you get into Fascination, which is probably the closest thing to a Philadelphia soul record that he managed on the album. It's funky, it's upbeat, underpinned by Carlos Alomar's really understated guitar work. I mean, I don't think, off the top of my head, I don't think there's a guitar solo on the whole of this album. It's so horn and vocal driven. All the voices are just up front and centre, and it's just a damn funky track. Then it goes into Right, which starts off slowly with sort of sax and guitar, and then it just transforms into unbelievable call and response. I mean, the planning that must have gone into the middle vocal section, where Bowie and the three main backing singers just, it's interlocking, intertwined. It's just an amazing piece of vocal work on this song. Just absolutely fantastic. Then you move onto side 2 and you've got Somebody Up There Likes Me, which is just a fine Bowie vocal. He runs a range of his voice. He's got growls, grunts, and yelps and falsetto. It's just a terrific vocal performance. But then this is such a vocalist album, more than probably any other record in his career. It was reliant on his voice interacting with his backing singers' voices. I mean, I can't understate how important that is to this record. Then you get Can You Hear... Oh, then you get Across the Universe. Now, Across the Universe is probably the most slated song on this album, but I will defend it. Yeah, it starts quite stilted. Not the most perfect cover version at all. But when you reach the ending of the song, and you don't know whether he means the main phrase of the song. You don't know whether he means it in a positive or a negative way. It could be nothing is going to change my world, and I'm going to stay the same because I'm in the depths of shite and nothing possibly could change it. Or whether he's upbeat and nothing, I feel so good, nothing is going to be able to change. You just can't tell because his vocals, especially towards the end, are so aggressive. And I just love the dichotomy of that on that version of Across the Universe. It becomes the whole focus of the song. Then you get Can You Hear Me, which is easily the most soulful track on the album. It's just lush, string-driven, gorgeous ballad. And then you get the US #1, Fame, rounding off the album. It's easily the most funky track on the album. It's like really staccato. Obviously he's planned every note. I don't think there's a single note wasted on the song. It's powered by Carlos Anamar's really slinky guitar riff. This is the one that he improvised off of a song called Foot Stomping. Can't remember who recorded that but at the moment, but I know it's written down somewhere. And it's the one song where Bowie really plays about with his voice. There's all kinds of effects on it, especially in the was it the bridge? But the bit where he famously starts really high and he ends up really low. And I think that song is a pointer to where he went next, where he went on Station to Station and then beyond. It's definitely not just plastic soul, it's just out and out funk. It's just brilliant. So there we go. I don't know whether I've convinced you that he did telegraph this or not, but I hope I've got across how much I absolutely love this album. I think I love it so much because deep down I just respond to vocals more than anything else. Yeah, you can't have rock and soul and all the rest of the stuff I love without guitars and drums and bass and all the rest of it, and horns and all the rest of it, keyboards. But I respond to vocals first. You could have the most perfect track, but if the singing ain't right, then I ain't gonna listen. And this album is just a vocalist's dream to listen to, I think. But there you go. So there you have it. My take on Young Americans by David Bowie. Major Left Swerve album? That's up for you to decide. Whatever it is, it's just pure genius. And with that, just like to say thanks for sticking around for all 25 minutes of this video. Hope you enjoyed it. And I'll see you all again soon. Thanks, VC. See you later. Bye.